So this conference comes on the back of Ceangal Dolen, which happened in the National Theatre of Scotland and was organised by Theatre Galore in partnership with the university here. And we are delighted to have many more partners, and I will introduce Rachel Halstead from Ali na Gaeltachta in a few minutes, agus Denna Shisha Kershis Quidella. But for the programme, I want to just quickly introduce the programme for the week. Today we have the Fáilte, Criso Fáilte, and we will have Minister Jack Chambers speaking to us. We will also have Arwell Griffith from the Theatre Gen in conversation. He will give us a keynote speech and he will then be in conversation with Muireann Kelly. And then we will have the first of our commissions from Kieran EA, followed by a short tea break where you can meet with the artist. So we have a full programme of events on Wednesday, Thursday and Friday. We will be looking at guiding principles in a closed session today, but any of you who are interested, and we would encourage you to come along on Friday, where we are also going to have an open session about about guiding principles that were come up with in Ceangal Dolen by those who in attendance, and these are things that have come from the industry itself, and things that we need to be looked at for visibility. So the last bit of housekeeping I'm going to talk about is just how we are going to do our translations. So ta ashrachan ko uinach ane gon kogal sha. We have simultaneous translation for this conference. And in order to activate this, I'd ask you to look at the bottom of your screen and see interpretation mode on the bottom of your Zoom screen. And in true minoritized language fashion, we've had to come up with a workaround because Gaeilge, Gaelic, agus Kimru, even though we have these languages, they're not recognized by Zoom. So what I want to remind you is just to click on the button at the bottom of the Zoom screen that says interpretation, and then it will pop up. You will press the button to translate from Irish or Gaeilge into English. It will come up as German, and to translate from Scots Gaelic or Welsh into English, you will press the Spanish button. So Irish to English, German, Scots Gaelic, or Welsh to English, Spanish button. And the only last thing I need to say is please interact. Please put questions in the chat box and try the buttons, the interpretation buttons now, so that you can hear the words of Arwell when he begins. Okay, I will now hand over to Rachel Halstead from Ali na Gaeltachta agus Currisisha and Quid Ella na Comisiún I Láthair Dúin gur míle maith agus buinigí soltas.
Míle magat Marianne agus fáilte is feithróh, bhí is fáilte ród croeso, Harcean Ali na Gaeltachta, agus I might just repeat what Marianne has said. I would speak in Irish now, so I'd encourage you to go down to the interpretation button if you need to, and hit German down there, and Cormac will very kindly interpret to English what I am about to say. Thank you, Cormac. Gur míle magat. So is privileged mór dúine bheith ag déanamh áiseóireacht an gcógáil seo. I dteannta grúpa cófortathe úntach san áireamh Ollscoil na hÉireann Gaillimh, an Taibhhearc, Theatre Galore san Alban, agus Theatre Gen Airclan Náisiúnta na Breatainaise sa Bhreatain Beag. Agus tá muid thar bheith bail chum lenar go bhuiineóirí an cógáil seo sin an Rhein. Tar a sóireachta cultúr alien Gaeltacht agus an sport agus an Éire Ildánach, TG Cahar, Colm Céile agus Chorla Cúpéidir na Maul. Agus mar is óldún goléir sa teomar seo massam, tá dríocht san airclaíocht agus tácht, agus tá réimsí ilíoch agus uhuail ann a bhain leis an rámíocht agus an airclaíocht. sna trí hanga trí na bemi de play le reint lehen macaron in ish. Agus tham dig súl gemoor le bheith I géiste. Ik lé agus ik fálam lenne chéile chun na gnéthe agus na riochnú sin a chiire agus Marianne Marianne chun fiochant cosán chun tosig dún goléir sa seomú seo. Bíon Marianne chuir beag an chlár an son agus hastig bhm just go garad na comisiún a lua mar hiigh sib an glár tá sé comisiún ann atá speisialta an ggóáil seo bra se an háchtach goin go raibh an alíonn féin na alíonntóirí I grílár na heachta agus tásúlagan go minic sib sult a san cloisiigh sib séhir Ciara ní in nuh agus beag séhir ó Sam O'Farry, ó Beth Frieden, ó Chris Harris, ó Davy Walker agus ó Mary Ellen Jones comma le tacht na linta amach roin. So, ní dhearr mé mór an eile ach beag an tara tá cúpla focail a gcoinne an tara Jack Chambers an tara Stát Melteach agus beag cúpla focail a gcoinne uig siú tá mí thar bheith buach a son agus deir mí libh winsult as an cúpla lá amach rón tá mí agsúil go mór le gachfud a beag árá ann agus mar dúirt Marianne lehór dul bí a caint lena chéile bí a caint linn tasí an gachfud a chluisint tásúlagan go ní tús choráid seo cinnte de hosna an chorá ag Ceangal Dolen a héim san Alban so is leanúnachas atá ann chorá agus tásúlagan go leannig an chorá fada amach an sa. So buinnig soltas agus chuirgí fáilte lehór dul rih cúpla focail an tara Jack Chambers. Gur míle maithagah.
Bhuailm ará gur mór an honour dumsa mar príomhíor an rialtais agus airstát do sport agus an Gaelta cúpla focail ará ag tús na chógála seo. Tóir an chógáil an deis do chlan alíonntóirí na Gaeilge na Gaelic agus simrig teach le chéile líne chun deachlachtas airneall na ddramaíochta a phlé agus a cheiliúra. Gan buíochas le alíonn na Gaeltachta as ucht cuireadh hórtam. Is léir go bhfuil chomhaibbrú agus dlú cabhra idir na hagrais a ile tháinig le chéile chun cistú agus takeíocht a hort an imimecht. Mar rainn féin agus éire ildánach san áireamh chomá le hagraíochtaí eile arnóí. Tá airneall na nálín buailte hulk mar geall géircéim na pandéim COVID-19. Tá iad rialtas seo na tíre seo dírithe na deacraíochtaí atá ag cur as darnáil na nálín de bharr na pandéime. Le rion an inéistíocht de 103 milliún I muséid 55 sa chóirla alíonn chomá leis an 5 milliún san airneall imeachtaí beo agus síimseochta tomántas rialtas na tíre seo chun a chintú gur féidir leis na halíne marachtáil fás agus blathu irid is féidir sa cúnsí ratha. Arnóí tháinig sé sin sna sála an 20 milliún breise a cadíocht don chóirla alíonn I míúil se chaite sa facaiste spragapus. Thurma rainn alúntas fiú 1.275 milliún euro in umláin thart-tréimhse 3 bliain fáil d'alíonn na Gaeltachta a nuirí chun tuile takeíochta chur fáil don na halíne dúchasach atá díre éis ag óg na Gaeltachta. Rinneadh é sin chun takeú tuile le feidhmiú an phróiseas plean le teanga atá faoin lán seol anois. Ina cheantar sin tá muoinú breise 225 milliún euro cur fáil d'alíonn na Gaeltachta ag Morain agus éire ildánach a mlíana chun líon súntasach sporánachtaí a chur fáil d'alíonn atá lónithe sa Gaeltach. Tá an rainn faoi láthair ag obair a dro strátéis don na halíonn na teanga bhunaithe a gcóir le pórtaí a lasfar. Tá an obair seo á dhéanamh chun go méfar in ann planál chun tosaigh níos fearr a dhéanamh go chórasach agus céimiúil bharrta breise a méfar in ann a feidhmiú las na alíonn dúchasach sa tréimhse tá amachróin. Tigtar go bhfuil an chógáil seo ag tógáil ar an céad chógáil a bhí siúl in Alban ag plé leis an ddramaíocht san miontangacha agus tá chlór leatháin simúil leagathe amach. Tásúla go mbeidh chógáil tortha taitneamhach agus spreagáil a gcuibh agus go bhfeicimid tura gur blé amach an seo. Go ndearú libh agus go raibh míle maith a gcuibh.
a chuirde díreach le rá chu me fáiltenis rih murin teachtar scálan agus ar bhfuil Griffith ar mí maga.
Maid mad in bha borada is Mesha Muran Kelly. Saun na néidir na hami nam stúdice ag I theatr leor agus an Alpa. My name is Muran Kelly. I'm the artistic director of Theatre Galore, a contemporary Gaelic theatre company in Scotland. And we tour work throughout Scotland and abroad. And we do that with regular funding from Creative Scotland and Bord na Gaelic. It was a huge privilege for us to set out on this Ceangal Dolen journey this time last year. We worked in collaboration with Marianne at NUI Galway with support from Colm Céile. It was really important then to come together to bring artists, theatre makers, producers and funders together to share ideas and to look at the challenges facing us all when we're trying to tell our stories in our own languages. It goes to the heart of really who we are. And I am incredibly grateful that although we were all hoping to meet in the flesh in Galway, that I'm really grateful that this is still happening. And I'm grateful to all the support from Ali Nagel at the Creative Ireland and all the partners so that this can happen online. It feels like it's even more important that we meet and support one another and share ideas, particularly in the circumstances that we are all facing with theatre doors closed. And particularly artists working in these three languages. The challenges for us are the same as challenges facing everybody else, but some of them are more unique. My job today is to introduce our keynote speaker, who I feel I'm destined to never actually meet in the flesh. I had an exploratory meeting a few years back in the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland about an MA course that they were setting up, and Arwell was due to speak in person, and I'm not sure if you remember this. I think it was a cancelled flight or something, so we had to make do with a crackly line through Skype, as it was in those days. But nonetheless, I can safely say we all left the room with a spring in our step. And he lifted our hearts when he spoke about his work in Welsh and gave us such encouragement for our work in Gaelic, and I'm sure for all the artists and makers working in Irish too. I'm sure he'll do exactly the same today. He is the director of the National Welsh Language Theatre in Wales, Theatr Genedlaethol Cymru, and I won't delay any further. I would just like to say falche, creso, to Arwell Griffith.
Diolch yn fawr, Maureen. Thank you very much. Diolch. Dwi'n gobeithio fod pawb yn clywed ac yn gweld bod y dechnoleg yn gweithio I bawb. A dwi'n siŵr y medar rwy'n adael mi wybod yn y chat os oes na broblem. Dwi'n mynd I siarad heddiw yn y Gymraeg. Felly diolch o galon I chi am y croeso a'r gwahoddiad arbennig hwn I roi'r araith agoriadol yn ail gynhadledd Ceangal Dolen. Gwyddelod ar Albanwyr yn rhannu'r un gair mae'n ymddangos tra bod ni'r Cymru yn mynnu bod yn wahanol, nid am y tro cyntaf dwi'n siŵr. Braf iawn, bydda wedi bod, tasan ni wedi gallu bod dod ynghyd yn Ninas Hyfryd Galway wrth gwrs fel afwriadwyd, ond dyna ni, doedd I ddim I fod. Gyda llaw, gwybodaeth i'r Gwyddelod a'r Albanwyr, mae'r gair Cymraeg, dolen, yn cael ei ddefnyddio gan amla yn y Gymraeg fel mae'r gair link yn cael ei ddefnyddio yn Saesneg, enghraifft dolen mewn Cadwyn. A mae hefyd yn cael ei ddefnyddio yn ei gyd-destun mwy diweddar, eto fel y gair Saesneg link, wrth gyfeirio at ffordd sy'n rhoi mynediad I safle we neu wybodaeth neilltuol ar blatfform digidol. Yndi, mae'r Gymraeg yn iaith technoleg fodern, fel y mae'r Gwyddeleg a Gaeleg a'r Alban, dwi'n siŵr, nad ydw i ar Siom yn siarad yr un o'r ddwy iaith. Felly dyfalu ydw i yn hynny o beth. Ac nid yn unig yn iaith reilwyd, y capel a chanu gwerin. Mae'n rhyfedd sut mae rheini sy'n siarad Saesneg yn unig, weithiau yn dewis gwneud hwyl am yn penna ni siaradwyr ieithoedd lleiafrifol ac o bosib hefyd siaradwyr ieithoedd mwyafrifol eraill am i ni greu geiriau yn hunain, yn yn iaith yn hunan ar gyfer datblygiadau technolegol neu wyddonol neu ddiwylliannol cyfoes. Fel petai'r rheini'n rhywbeth ymwthiol neu rhyw fath o eithafiaeth neu rhywbeth ffug neu fiantus i'w wneud. Wedi dweud hynny, mae siaradwyr ieithoedd lleiafrifol eu hunan hefyd yn wfftio'r peth yn yr un ffordd. Cofiwch, maen nhw'n chwerthin am yn penna ni hefyd pan fyddwn ni yn cynnwys y geiriau Saesneg am beth ar fath mewn brawddeg yn yn iaith yn hunan. A'r chwerthin hwnnw falle'n awgrymu rhyw dinc o, tydych iaith chi ddim cystal â'n iaith ni, neu fedrwch chi ddim gwneud hebddi yn amlwg i chi drio. Dyna fo, does na ddim ennill i gael. Mae iaith lleiafrifol ac erledigaeth a chael yn gwawdio fel petai nhw yn mynd law yn llaw. Tawaith, mae'n beth cwbl naturiol pan fo gwrthrycha a syniadaethau newydd ym mhob agwedd ar fywyd ac ym mhob gwlad yn cael ei geni, bod angen i henwi nhw hefyd wrth gwrs ym mhob iaith. Mae yna ryw ragdybiaeth eang, a fel dwi'n dweud mae'n bodoli hefyd ymhlith siaradwyr ieithoedd lleiafrifol, bod popeth newydd fel petai yn perthyn yn unigryw i ddiwylliant iaith Saesneg, i'r mwyafrif ieithyddol. Yr awgrym, mae'n siŵr, ydy mae iaith pethau hynafol neu draddodiadol yn unig ydy'r Gymraeg a ieithoedd lleiafrifol eraill. A bod popeth newydd, popeth sy'n gyfoes, popeth sy'n edrych tua'r dyfodol yn perthyn i'r iaith Saesneg fendigedig, iaith conquest, iaith y buddigwr, iaith ryngwladol y mwyafrif llethol. Henlol ydy creu geiriau Cymraeg fel cyfrifiadur, lloeren, mewnbwn, allbwn, trydar, a lawr lwytho. A gai yn fan hyn, os gwelwch yn dda, rhoi taw ar y myth yn bod ni yn deud popdi ping yn Gymraeg am microwave oven, ac egluro mae joc greulon neu ddychymyg gwyllt rhyw athro Cymraeg ail iaith ddwy neu dair degawd yn ôl sy'n gyfrifol am y myth milltigedig yma. Mor fendigedig o ddigri ydy popdi ping. Mae'n ddrwg iawn gynnau rhoi ping yn eich balwn, ond popdi microdon ydy'r term Cymraeg cydnabyddedig am microwave oven. Ond wedi dweud hynny, os di bobl eisiau dweud popdi ping, ewch amdani. Mae o'n llawer gwell mewn brawddeg Gymraeg na dweud microwave. Ar ddiwedd y dydd, consensws sy'n lledaenu term newydd. A hynny heb fawr ddim trafodaeth ac yn sicr gan chwalu myth arall falle, nid rhyw fwrdd statudol neu bwyllgor o bobl bwysig sy'n gwneud penderfyniadau ar ba eiriau i'w defnyddio ar gyfer hyn a llall, yn ôl fel y gwela i beth bynnag. Falle bod gan BBC Cymru neu S4C rôl allweddol yn chwarae yn hyn o beth yng nghyd-destun y Gymraeg. A gwrth basio eto am y ddiwch, os newch chi am eiliad yr ymddygiad Trumpaidd, dwi'n meddwl mae fi sy'n gyfrifol am y terma Cymraeg sydd bellach yn cael ei defnyddio'n gymharol eang am verbatim theatr, sef theatr gair am air, a preview, sef rhagddangosiad. Felly mae di'n anghywir yn hyn o beth, cofiwch. Ond beth dwi'n trio dweud ydy bod gynnon ni gyd gyfle a dyletswydd falle i fathu a lledaenu terma yn yn iaith yn hunan. A mae hynny'n digwydd yn gymarol rwydd a gweddol gyflym y dyddiau yma wrth gwrs oherwydd dylanwad cyfryngau cymdeithasol. Beth bynnag, nid henlol fel y gwela i o, neu weithred ffiantus neu ymosodol hyd yn oed ydy creu yn geiriau'n hunan mwyn byw yn bywydau modern trwy gyfrwng y Gymraeg, ond rhywbeth hanfodol. Ymhen cam mlynedd, pan fydd bob dim yn newydd, os fyddwn ni ddim wedi creu geiriau Cymraeg ar gyfer bob datblygiad gwyddonol neu ddiwylliannol neu wrthrych newydd fel maen nhw'n ymddangos, fydd na fawr o Gymraeg i'w chlywed. Ac os mae dim ond fi, ac ac fydd ar ôl mewn brawddeg honedig Gymraeg, yna hawdd iawn bydda gollwng rheini hefyd yn wir, mi fyddai cynnwys nhw yn ffiantus. Na drwy ddeud cyfrifiadur, lawr lwytho a dolen, dwi'n teimlo rhyw falchder, a mewn rhyw ffordd fachdawel dwi'n teimlo mrest yn ymchwyddo, wrth i mi fyny fy hawl, mynnu fy iaith, mynnu fy hunaniaeth. A be am yr hunaniaeth hwnnw fel siaradwr Cymraeg? Fel siaradwr iaith leiafrifol? Cyn troi at y gair lleafrifol, falle bydde fo'n ddefnyddiol i mi esbonio cystadlau gymedrau y berthynas yn fras iawn rhwng y Gymraeg, y Wyddeleg a Gaeleg yr Alban. Wrth gwrs, ieithoedd Celtaidd ydy'r rhain, fel mae'r Saesneg yn iaith Germaneg. Ac ar ryw bwynt, yn bell yn ôl yn hanes, mi ymwahanodd yr iaith Geltaidd yn ieithoedd Brythonig ar y naill law a Goedelig ar y llaw arall. Ieithoedd Goedelig wedyn ydy'r Wyddeleg, Gaeleg yr Alban a'r Fanaweg, ac ieithoedd Brythonig ydy'r Gymraeg, y Gernyweg a'r Llydaweg. Felly rhyw berthyn pell ydy'r Gymraeg mewn gwirionedd i'r ieithoedd Goedelig. Mae gen I fel siaradwr Cymraeg gymaint o siawns i ddeall rhywun pan maen nhw'n siarad Gwyddeleg ac sydd gan siaradwr Saesneg siawns o ddeall rhywun pan maen nhw'n siarad Almaeneg. Dwi'n i'm os di'r Gwyddelod a'r Albanwyr yn rhywun ar ddeall ei gilydd, ond mi alla i ddeud mae chydig iawn dwi'n ei ddeall pan mae rhywun yn siarad Llydaweg, enghraifft. O be dwi wedi glywed o'r Gernyweg ar y llaw arall dwi'n tueddu i ddeall chydig bach mwy ohono. Ond beth bynnag am hynny, gan ddod yn ôl at y gair lleafrifol yma, mae o'n air problematig wrth drafod iaith. Tydi lleafrifedig, minoritized, neu llai defnydd ddim yn gwneud i ffwrdd ar broblem chwaith yn anffodus. Tydi'r term ddim falle yn problematig i rhywun sydd ddim yn siarad iaith o'r fath, neu ddim yn siarad iaith o'r fath fel mamiaith, ond i rheini ohono ni sydd yn, mae rhain yn derma sy'n awgrymu yn bod ni'n fach, o hanfod yn llai nerthol, yn llai pwysig, yn llai perthnasol. Tydi o fawr y syndod felly bod pobl yn troi oddi wrth yr ieithoedd yma. Pwy mewn gwirionedd sydd isio perthyn i lwyth o'r fath. Mewn byd lle trechaf, treisiad, lle gwelwn ni o un eiliad i'r llall, y mwyafrif nerthol yn sathru'r gwan, y mwyafrif yn trechu'r lleafrif, y breintiedig yn dal yn dyn yn ei braint. Wedi dweud hynny, mi wyddwn ni'n iawn hefyd yn achos dosbarth cymdeithasol a chyfoeth materol, mae gen y lleafrif yma'r pŵer, y lleafrif sy'n freintiedig. A mae rhaid i mi na gyfadda bod hi'n teimlo'n freintiedig iawn fel siaradwr Cymraeg yn falch o'r ffaith. Yn bod ni'n gorfod mynnu'n hawl yn gyson i'w siarad hi. Mae hi'n rhywbeth arbennig, cymharol, unigryw, yn ddiwylliannol. Neu byth anghofio cyfaill o Sais yn dweud wrthai rhyw dro. Dwi'n eiddigeddus ohona ti am fod gen ti hunaniaeth. Does dim rhaid i mi ddweud falle nad ydy'r Sais hwnnw'n uniaethu efo Jack yr Undeb, na'r chwaith efo gwerthoedd Farage a Boris a'i criw. Dydy o'm hyd yn oed yn dilyn pêl-droed, na chriced na rygbi. Mae hunaniaeth iddo fo yn rhywbeth llawer llai pwysig, yn anweledig iddo fo hyd yn oed. Ond mae gen I hunaniaeth. Dwi'n gwbl sicr o hynny, a dwi'n gwisgo'r hunaniaeth hwnnw ar yn llawas yn ddyddiol. Mae o'n un amlochrog, gymlath, ond dwi'n aruthrol o falch ohono fo. Mi allwn ni roi rhestr i chi. Dwi'n Gymro, yn siaradwr Cymraeg, yn gyfarwyddwr theatr, yn actor, ddim os tro falle, ond mae o dal yna. Dwi yn dod o gartref dosbarth gweithiol, dwi'n hoyw, yn Ewropead, yn Remainer. Yndw, dwi'n ddyn, dwi'n abl o gorff, a dwi'n wyn. Ond rwsyd mae'r pethau hynny yn llai pwysig i mi. Ac yndw, dwi'n siaradwr Saesneg, a hefyd yn Brydeiniwr, dan orfodaeth. A tra bod y nodweddion diwetha yma yn llai pwysig gen I, neu'n wrthyn I mi hyd yn oed yn achos yr olaf un, mae o'n ddyletswydd arna I wrth reswm I gydnabod y fraint sy'n dod efo'r hunaniaethau neu'r nodweddion yma. Yn wir, mae'r nodweddion yma yn rhoi fi mewn sefyllfa o bŵer, Prydeiniwr, abl o gorff, gwyn, gwrywaidd. Diolch yn syndod gynnwch chi glwed falle mod i'n llawer mwy cyffyrddus a gwell o lawer gen I fod efo'r giang arall, efo'r lleafrif yn gorfod sefyll yn hir yn nes at y ddaear falle. Nid mod i'n Gristion bellach, ond tybed nad ydy'r ddysgeidiaeth honno yr oriau anfoddog nes I treulio yn yr ysgol Sul wedi gadael ei hôl. Canys iddynt yw teyrnas nefoedd. A mae yna rinwedd ar hamant yn sicr yn perthyn i'r syniad o fod yn lleafrif. yn arbennig o fod yn orchfygedig. Da ni'r Cymru yn dal hanes y Gododdin enghraifft yn agos iawn at yn clona. Mae'n rhoi rhyw gynhysgaeth i ni. Y Gododdin gyda llaw i'r gerdd arwrol honno gan y bardd Aneurin am fintau o'r un enw, un dewr a dethol o Gymru, a laddwyd i gyd mewn brwydr rhwng Cymru, yr hen ogledd, ardal Ystrad Clud, a gogledd ddwyrain Lloegr heddiw, yn y 6ed ganrif. Gwir aedd gatraeth, oedd ffraeth i llu, glasfedd i hancwyn a gwenwyn fu, trichant trwy beiriant yn catau, ac wedi elwch, tawelwch fu. Trichant dewr yn taflu hunan gyda phob ymdrech bosib i geisio gwrthsefyll lliaws enfawr o Saeson, y gelyn. Ac mae colli wnaethon nhw, mi wnaethon nhw i gora. Dwi'n mynd ama yn bod ni Gymru heddiw hefyd yn falch bod nhw wedi cael uffar o sesh noson cyn y frwydr, a dwi'n yn siŵr be mae hynny'n dweud amdano ni. Ond ta waith. Da ni hefyd yn dal gafal yn y syniad mae brwydr a gollwyd oedd hon mewn rhyfel sy'n parhau o hyd. Nid dros dir erbyn hyn, ac nid yn enw goruchafiaeth o unrhyw fath, ond dros yn hiaith falle, ac i rei dros hunaniaeth wleidyddol neu hunan lywodraeth hyd yn oed. Mae'r Saeson yn defnyddio Charge of the Light Brigade a barddoniaeth tennis yn ei berwyl tebyg iawn, felly peidiad i ni ameddwi gormod ar yr hamant fel y meddwodd y Gododdin ar ei medd cyn brwydr catraeth. Felly pam bo fi ac eraill o'n hyd Gymru yn teimlo balchder, y balchder yma o fod yn perthyn i leiafrif gorchfygedig. Pan dwi'n sicr bod eraill yn ymhlith ni yn rhedeg milltir o'r fath hunaniaeth. Cheisi ddim yn ngeni deulu wrth ryfelwyr neu ymgyrchwyr iaith, na'n magu mewn ardal sydd wedi diodda trychineb neu anghyfiawnder neilltuol. Ym Mhentra Tan y Grisia ag Erbyn a Ffestiniog ges i'n magu. Ôl ddiwydiannol mae'n siŵr fydda rhai yn galw ardal o'r fath o dyddiau yma. Mi welwn ni lyniau o'r ardal yn nes ymlaen yn y gynhadledd yma fel dwi'n deall yn waith Mari Elen. Pentra wedi sefydlu yn ystod y chwyldro diwydiannol a'r diwydiant llechi oedd diwydiant neilltuol yn pentra ni, a chwarelwyr oedd y rhan fwyaf o'n hyndadau. Pobl ddigon gyffredin ydy'n rhieni fi. Weithiau hefyd oedd dau wedi magu yn yr un pentra, Tan y Grisia. Mi oedd yn had yn weithiwr mewn gorsaf bwar niwclear gyfagos, a mam yn wraig tŷ yn bennaf ond yn gweithio'n rhan amser yn achlysurol. Chafodd yr un o'r ddau addysg prifysgol, dad yn gadael yr ysgol ramadeg yn 14 i fynd i weithio mewn siop, a mam yn gadael yr ysgol ganol raddol heb unrhyw gymhwyster o sylwedd. Do'na ddim silff lyfrant i ni, a papur newydd tabloid fydda'n cyrraedd acwn ddyddiol. Do'n i ddim yn ymwybodol pan o'n i'n blentyn fod i'n perthyn i leiafrif ieithyddol. Yn wir, ar yr aelwyr lle ges i'n magu, Cymraeg oedd yr unig iaith oedd yn cael ei siarad. Cymraeg oedd iaith y pentra, yr ardaloedd cyfagos i gyd, a Chymraeg oedd iaith yr rhanbarth o Gymru lle ges i'n magu, iaith y mwyafrif llethol oedd hi. Doedd na ddim byd yn lliafrif amdani hi o gwbl. A felly, yn blentyn yn sicr, o'n i'n cymryd y Gymraeg yma yn gwbl ganiataol. Doedd na ddim problem yn ei chylchu. Doedd na ddim isiw o fath yn y byd. Mae hanes trefi a phentrefi diwydiant llechi gogledd Cymru ychydig yn wahanol i rhan fwyaf o gymoedd glo de, enghraifft. Yn yr ystyr, bod pobl yn amlwg wedi tyrru i'r ardaloedd hynny fel ei gilydd i weithio, yn achos y diwydiant llechi, gyda fod wedi bod yn llai diwydiant o ran nifer i gyflogau na'r diwydiant glo, tyrru wnaethon nhw i'r chwareli o ardaloedd cyfagos gwledig, ardaloedd Cymraeg i iaith. Gweithwyr fferm o ardal Ardudwy oedd cyn-deidia yn had at ei gilydd, ac yn llun ag efionydd mae gwreiddiau o leia un ochr i deulu mam. O ganlyniad, ni achosodd y symudiad hwn mewn poblogaeth yn ystod y chwyldro diwydiannol newid ieithyddol. Uniaith Gymraeg oedd bywyd gwaith y chwareli pan oedd y diwydiant hwnnw yn iamterth. Ac os oedd yna rai yn dod ac o bell, buan iawn o'r oedden nhw'n dod yn siaradwyr Cymraeg, yn bennaf gan fod yna'r gynlliad ohonyn nhw. Ond yn achos cymoedd glo de, mai o ardaloedd gwledig cyfagos ac o ardaloedd eraill o Gymru, yr oedd y gweithfeydd hynny hefyd yn bennaf yn dwyn i gweithlu, mi deithiodd nifer fawr iawn yno hefyd o dros y ffin o Loegr. Tra bod y Gymraeg a'r bywyd diwylliannol Cymraeg wedi ffynnu yn ardaloedd y llechi, a hefyd yn rhai o gymoedd glo de orllewin, o dipyn i beth, colli tir i'r Saesneg wnaeth iaith a bywyd diwylliannol cymoedd glo mwy dwyreiniol Morgannwg a Gwent. Beth bynnag, mae Cymraeg oedd iaith y pentra a'r ardal lle ges i'n magu yn benna, nid bywyd uniaeth Gymraeg oedd hwnnw wrth reswm. Ac os nad oeddwn ni'n anheulu, fel tas ni'n gweld bod yna isiw ynghylch y Gymraeg, doedd na ddim isiw chwaith ynghylch bod yn ddwyieithog. Dwi'm yn cofio dysgu Saesneg, ond yn sicr nes i ddim i dysgu hi gyn yn rhieni. Dwi'n rhyw lun o gofio methu siarad Saesneg yn blentyn bach, ond eto dwi'm yn cofio dysgu Saesneg yn yr ysgol, fel mae rhywun falle yn cofio dysgu penodau mewn hanes neu wybodaeth neilltuol ynghylch daearyddiaeth, neu dysgu long division. Falle mod i'n blentyn wedi llyncu pilsan rhywun noson a deffro bore wedyn yn ddwyieithog. A falle wedyn bod gi'n rhaglenni teledu a cherddoriaeth boblogaidd Saesneg di-baid fwy nid efo'r peth. Cymraeg oedd iaith y cartra, yr ysgol Sul, a'r pentra a'i holl ddigwyddiadau diwylliannol, a mi o'na lot o'r rheini. Saesneg oedd iaith y byd tu hwnt. A'r byd hwnnw'n yn cyrraedd ni trwy teledu a radio, trip achlysurol i Bictiws Port, ac ymweliadau dieithriaid a theulu o bell o dro i dro, a gwyliau ha glan môr o bryd i'w gilydd i Southport, neu Dimpych y Pysgod, neu Weston-super-Mare. Oedd mi o'na bobl yn byw yn y pentra oedd ddim yn medru'r Gymraeg, mewn fudwyr i gyd, ond prin iawn oedd rheini. A mi oedd plant, yr hanner dwsin neu lai o deuluoedd oedd wedi ymfudo i'r pentra yn gymharol ddiweddar, yn mynd i'r un ysgol am mi, ac yn dod yn siaradwyr Cymraeg rhugl mewn dim o dro. A mi ddylwn ychwanegu yma hefyd falle, mae felly roedd hybryd hynny yn y 1970au. Mae'r sefyllfa yn byr wahanol erbyn hyn, gyda bod mwyafrif o dau y pentra bellach lle ges i'n magu, naill ai'n dau ha, neu'n gartrefi bobl sydd wedi ymfudo yno o Loegr. A mae hynny'n wir am y rhan fwyaf o'r llefydd da ni'n licio meddwl amdanyn nhw fel cadarnleoedd yr iaith Gymraeg. Mae Llywodraeth Cymru yn anffodus naill ai yn ddall i'r her, neu'r perygl hyd yn oed yma un hiaith, neu maen nhw'n dewis i anwybyddu. Oherwydd mae hi'n argyfwng, ac yn argyfwng sydd mor amlwg a mor glir a hael gorffennaf ganol dydd. Nes i ddim dod yn ymwybodol bod na isiw o gylch yr iaith Gymraeg, nes i rywun un noson beintio llinell wen ar draws y gair slow swyddogol oedd yn rhedeg ar draws y ffordd mewn un rhan o'r pentra acw, a rhoi araf answyddogol uwch I ben. Mi achosodd hyn gryn drafodaeth yn y pentra fel gallwch chi ddychmygu. Felly hefyd ar ynheilwyd nina, pawb fwy neu lai gan gynnwys yn rhieni yn gweld y peth fel gweithred o fandaliaeth. Dwi'n cofio'r peth yn achosi cryn benbleth I mina yn blentyn 8 neu 9 oed. Mae gen I chwaer sydd 7 mlynedd yn hyn na fi, a mi ddaethon ni ddeall falle mae un o ffrindiau'n chwaer yn yr ysgol uwchradd oedd y fandal oedd yn gyfrifol am y drosedd yma. Dwi'm yn cofio os gafodd I dal neu fynd o blaen I gwell, ond beth bynnag, mi gymrodd hi ryw 10 I 12 mlynedd I mi oddi ar hynny, ddod o hyd i'r dewrder I beintio arwydd a difrodi eiddo yn enw'r iaith. Fes I roed yn y carchar am y fath drosedda, mae yna llawer mwy dewr na mi wedi bod, wrth gwrs. Beth bynnag, mi daniodd y fandaliaeth hwnnw i'r gair slow ar dipyn o darmac yn Han y Grisia, rhyw dan yna I sy'n llosgi am hwn I o hyd. Rhyw foment o ping fel yn achos y popdy. Ond pam? Oedd o'n fod y weithred yn un mor anarferol, ymosodol, o wedyn dydw I ddim yn rebal wrth reddf. Oedd o am bod yn had a nain ar ochr mam, o'i dau yn hoff iawn o ganeuon Dafydd Iwan, y canwr protest Cymraeg. Daw dydd y bydd mawr y rhai bychain, mae'n wlad I mi, a ffeintio'r byd yn wyrdd. Rebeliaid tawal I hunan o'i dau falle. Neu oedd o oherwydd mod i'n ymwybodol iawn o oed cynnar mod i'n wahanol o ran rhywioldeb. Nid mod I wedi deall yn iawn y teimlad hwnnw o wahaniaeth, tan rhyw 4 neu 5 mlynedd yn ddiweddarach. Nid bob un siaradwr Cymraeg o ran mamiaeth, nag ychwaith o'r rheini sydd wedi dysgu Cymraeg sy'n teimlo'r angen i frwydro drosti. Yn wir, mi liciwn ni'n aml iawn, pe byddwn ni fy hun ddim yn teimlo y rheidrwydd hwnnw. Mae rhywun yn blino ar fod yr un yn ystafell real neu rithiol sy'n gorfod gwneud pwynt neu godi mater o hawl yng nghyd-destun y Gymraeg, ac yn eiddigeddus o'r rheini sy'n gallu cymryd eu iaith, ba bynnag iaith, yn ganiataol. Dyna ni, pawb a'i groes berig. Ond dyna pwy ydw i, dyna be ydw i, yr iaith, achos yr iaith bellach sy'n yngyrru, hwnnw di'r peiriant yn nghorff i bron, yr hyn sy'n yn ysbrydoli fel artist, fel arweinydd, ac fel bod gwleidyddol. Tra mod i'n gwybod yn iawn fod yna eraill yn y byd theatr sy'n teimlo'r un fath o fi. Dwi'n mynd i sgol o gwbl wrth reswm fod pob un sy'n wneud o'r theatr sy'n siarad Cymraeg yn teimlo'r un gynedd. Mae pawb ohonyn yn unigryw, o ran yn cefndir a'n dylanwadau, ac o ran yn gobeithio'n a'n delfrydau. Ond gyda bod theatr a drama yn arf cymdeithasol, yn asiant ar gyfer creu newid, dwi'n mawr obeithio o leia y bydd yna eraill ymhlith y genhedlaeth nesaf o weithwyr, o wneithurwyr ac o arweinwyr theatr Cymraeg i iaith yn teimlo'r un fath. Bydd y Gymraeg, fel unrhyw iaith leiafrifol arall, ddim yn goroesi, ond i bai yn bod ni yn gwneud ymdrech fwriadol ac ar adegau ymwthiol i'w gwarchod hi, bod hynny mewn modd amlwg neu'n gynnil. Mae'n demtasiwn i ni feddwl bod y gwaith calad wedi wneud, bod protestwyr ifanc yn 60au a'r 70au wedi gorffan y job, bod yr hyn i fi'n peintio arwyddion uniaith Saesneg ddegawdau nôl wedi caniatáu i ni heddiw droi'n golgon at faterion eraill, llawer pwysicach byd eang. Wedi caniatáu i ni gymryd yn iaith yn ganiataol, fel oeddwn ni pan o'n i'n blentyn diniwad, a chaniatáu i ni fod yn debycach i'r Saeson neu'r di-Gymraeg, yn rhydd o faich iaith. Neu falle yn bod ni jyst wedi blino brwydro, battle fatigued. Beth bynnag, o dderbyn pwy ydw i, a beth sy'n yngyrru, mae o wedi bod yn anrhydedd gwirioneddol gen i, a dydw i ddim yn gweniaethu i arwain yn cwmni theatr cenedlaethol iaith Gymraeg ers bron i ddegawd bellach.
For almost a decade now, and I have felt it a duty in that role to strengthen the cause of the Welsh language, not to preach for it, as perhaps I'm doing here, but to present stories that tell our story as Welsh speakers, to present theatre productions in Welsh that insist on our place in contemporary European life, and to present in Welsh some of the world's great theatre works, giving the language status and its speakers confidence, whether that be in a direct way, as in the case of productions such as A Bont in 2013, which told the story of the first non-violent crime protest to demand rights for the Welsh language at Trefechan Bridge in Aberystwyth 50 years after the event, or by trying to present the best possible contemporary works in Welsh that reflect our everyday, naturally Welsh lives. I've tried to make people aware of their privilege as Welsh speakers, to ignite some pride in their language, and to create experiences that remain in the memory or throw some new light on the world around us through the medium of Welsh, to create moments of awakening. That's a microwave ping again. Using theatre as a tool or even a weapon, potentially, as Arf could translate either. In this context, I remember two occasions in particular over the last decade. While creating the production A Bont, I had the privilege of directly questioning four of the founders of Cymdeithasuriaeth Gymraeg, the Welsh Language Society, the writer and playwright Gareth Miles, Nick Stevens, the original graffiti artist who painted the Cofiwch Droeri mural, of course, the popular historian Dr. John Davies, and Teddy Millwood, who was later immortalized, of course, as Prince Charles's Welsh teacher in the Netflix series The Crown. Of those four, sadly, only Gareth Miles remains with us today, and if he is watching, well, my warm regards to you, Gareth. But when I questioned Teddy Millwood, he explained to me that not only were they all inspired by Saunders Lewis's famous radio speech, Tynged yr Iaith, The Fate of the Language, in 1962, but that he and John Davis, I think, travelled to Switzerland around that time in an attempt to understand better how that country dealt with multilingualism, looking for inspiration and guidance, I suppose. They were particularly struck by the fact that all of the languages of the country were very visible there, that the road signs there all displayed more than one language at a time when, of course, this was not the case here in Wales. A simple symbolic image, some kind of epiphany, which eventually triggered the Society's road signs campaign, a campaign that reached Tanagrisha in the middle of the 70s, as I mentioned. And secondly, I had the privilege in 2012 of taking a Welsh language theatre production called Llwyth, which was very popular here in Wales in 2010 and 11, to an international arts festival in Taipei in Taiwan. And I remember the conversations that we had with the audience after the performances, where they asked questions about the prominent position of the Welsh language as a minority language in Wales. People seemed to be very surprised that we in Wales have bilingual road signs, printed literature, theatre productions in Welsh, a television channel, all in the Welsh language. There are minority languages in Taiwan, but they are completely invisible and their speakers have no rights at all. Most of them can speak Taiwanese, but that is only the language of the home and has an old-fashioned image, an unofficial, invisible and low-status language. And I remember a particular conversation with two people who stayed behind after the official question and answer session had come to an end. And one of them asked, how is it that Welsh is so visible, has such prominence in Welsh cultural life? And I explained that it was only because some of us had insisted that that was how it should be, and that it had not happened accidentally, but rather that it was the result of campaigning, protest, and yes, breaking the law at times. And I saw the surprise in their eyes, and I think I saw a penny drop. Bing. And that proved to me that not only is theatre a tool for change, but also that it's important that we should work and travel internationally to share experiences as widely as possible. Obviously, it's hard for us to conceive of that in the usual or traditional way in the middle of a pandemic like this. But when we get things into some kind of order again, whether we learn to live and cope with the terrible virus, or whether we develop some natural immunity or other kind of immunity, it will be key to re-engage in international cooperation. And an online conference like this is a great way to keep that flame alive in the meantime. And who knows whether digital conferences like this might be a way to keep working and sharing experiences in future. A positive legacy to this pandemic. The fall of Trump in the United States is a huge relief for us all here, I'm sure, and I sincerely hope that this will also signal a shift away from the politics of isolation and raising boundaries that have raised their ugly head in Britain in the last few years. And I'm not talking here about self-government or otherwise for our nations. That's another question. If we had already got here in this island to some kind of state of nirvana or some Avalon, then I could understand why one would want to protect it. But sadly, as far as I can tell, that's not the case. And anyway, what is heaven for one is hell for another. Whether it's within the borders of our own country or globally, the journey towards perfection is endless. An endless journey to our way of organizing our coexistence, a journey where we fall and fail, learn and educate, agree and disagree, struggle and reconcile. And in the middle of all of this, there will be moments of awakening and a sudden hitting upon a vision, moments where the microwave of the imagination goes ping. And once a penny drops, that will influence the work then that we create as artists, and what we communicate to others from day to day, which in turn will influence others. And I'm sure that theatre makers in all languages feel that honour, and also the burden of that duty. For those of us who work in minority languages, that is an extra layer or a particular pressure about it. Because we know that our language is not only a treasure, but also is fragile. And it's not easy to make theatre in a minority language at the moment. It's not easy, of course, to create theatre of any sort. And in any case, making theatre in any language, in any era, involves a heroic endeavour. But when working in minority languages, there are particular challenges, additional challenges, not least the smaller pool of professional practitioners that we can draw upon, and how to reach the widest possible audience. Also, how to reach audiences beyond those who speak the language without compromising the experience of those for whom the work is primarily intended. I'm sure we all wrestle every day with those challenges, and this week may be an opportunity to discuss some of them. But what do we, the Celtic language theatre makers of these islands, have in common, or what special experiences would it be valuable for us to share? Well, who knows? Through having discussions together and sharing experiences at conferences such as this, there is hope that we can find answers, or perhaps find the appropriate questions as a start. So many different contexts, as many as there are minority languages. Teddy Millward and John Davis's experiences and challenges were not the same as those of the Swiss people of the 1960s. Our experiences as cast and creative team of Llwyth were not the same as those of the audience in Taipei. And the experiences of theatre makers and language planners in Scotland, Wales, and Ireland are not the same. But perhaps there will this week be moments of sudden enlightenment, a few pings, if not indeed epiphanies. It's only by sharing and travelling virtually on this occasion that we will get to know. Well, thank you very much, and the best of luck to everyone this week as we seek and construct further relevant, useful, and I hope inspirational links between our particular languages and our unique experiences. Thank you very much indeed.
Diolch, Arwel.
Thank you, Arwel.
Thank you so much for that. You didn't fail to inspire me, definitely, and I'm sure everybody else feels the same. I'd also like to thank the Minister of State, Jack Chambers, who spoke earlier to us too. All of this is just getting us started on this journey this week. And I'd just like to say, if anyone wants to ask any questions of Arwel, if you could put them in the Q&A, which is down at the bottom of your screen, and I'll do my best to do the Eurovision Song Contest version of going between questions. I
think I should have included that in my list of key identity features. A big fan of the Eurovision Song Contest.
Excellent. Anyway. Okay, you're not alone. And just to confuse matters for those of you who are listening, yes, I am. And yes, I do live in Scotland. And even though I am Irish, I speak Gaelic. So I know that's not helpful. I think, I'm a pick and mix Gael. That's how I decide to identify myself. So, lots to chew over there, Arwel. I suppose for me, I'd quite like to start with asking you a little about the work that you make in Theatre Again. So for those of us who are listening, do you want to give us a little context just about where you sit alongside the other national theatre? Because I know often that can be a bit confusing for folk. Obviously, your work is in the Welsh language. I thought I'd start there and just offer you an opportunity just to give us a little context there.
Sure. So we have two national theatres, two languages. So the other national theatre is National Theatre Wales. Theatre Genedlaethol Cymru means the National Theatre of Wales. So we share the same name, but they are two separate entities. Although we do often collaborate and have a close working relationship. National Theatre Wales presents work in English and Theatr Gen. And by the way, Welsh speakers and English speakers alike say Theatr Gen, in short for Theatr Genedlaethol Cymru. And Theatr Gen we present work in Welsh exclusively, although we do sometimes present work that's bilingual or multilingual. But our raison d'etre really is to make work in the Welsh language so that we make our contribution towards the cultural Welsh language landscape of Wales. We primarily make work that tours throughout Wales, although we sometimes make site-specific work or community-specific work in certain locations. And we present work in mid-scale venues up to 500 seats, or in small-scale venues up to 100 seats. So yes, it's a mixed bag, and we present original works in translation, devised work, scripted, the whole gambit really. We've also done some dance theatre as well in the past, and plan to do so again in the future.
Great. So yeah, for me, it's been a learning curve just getting to know you guys at Theatr Gen, and yeah, I'm hoping, as you say, all these collaborations, especially while we're all sitting on our sofas or locked in our houses, seem so important. I'm guessing that you, like every other theatre director and theatre maker, would always want your work to be taken and received on its own merits. And obviously you've touched upon work directly relating to the language and addressing particular things. I suppose our experience in Scotland, and I think it's common to Ireland, I can't speak on behalf of the whole nation, but we do find ourselves as a company who work in Scottish Gaelic often caught between the sort of trying to balance the tightrope between being the organisation that validates, if you like, theatre within the organisations who promote the languages, and then on the other hand, often finding that you have to speak on behalf, or at least, to use your words, pushy, try and push the agenda for on behalf of artists and theatre makers who want to work in that language within the theatre landscape. And often those two worlds, I find, you spoke a lot about feeling tired sometimes of that. I think we're a little bit further down the line in Scotland and probably in Ireland. Can you give us some insights into how you keep that fight going, especially when you talked about theatre being an agent for change? What can we do when we're wrestling between those two worlds? Is it just more education? Is it more development? Is it making sure that we bring all the funders with us? Where do you think we should kind of take off? I'm speaking to you as I feel like the Welsh are at the top of the Premier League. I don't know where Ireland and Scotland are, but yeah. So
it's funny, isn't it? It's a bit like that sketch, isn't it, where one looks down to one and looks up to the other. I suppose we might look up to those in the Basque Country or Catalonia, or who we often feel are more advanced than us in terms of their policies and their practices with regards to their languages and their contexts. But no, I think we can all learn from each other. I think maybe kind of returning to your question, I think there's, I think what keeps us going is, and I think what we should hold in our hearts really is the fact that we should accept, it's never going to be easy. It's not easy making theatre or any kind of cultural activity in a minority language in a context where your language always has to kind of validate itself in a way. But just kind of accept your lot in that sense, but accept also that your lot is a very beautiful one. Even though it's one of conflict and it's one of having to stand up or make a stance or kind of fight for this and fight for the other. At the end of the day, we're fighting for it because we love it, because it's in our hearts, it's beautiful, it's unique, and we can feed off, we can feed from that, you know. That's who we are. We can't change who we are. We might wish we weren't you know, speakers of a minority language. I mean, there's a very famous Welsh poem by T.H. Parry Williams that speaks of this very eloquently. You know, you can't escape from it. So you might as well accept your lot and actually enjoy it for what it is. Enjoy the fight. You know, it's who we are. It's what we are, and we can't change that. But then theatre gives us an opportunity as theatre makers as well. It gives us an opportunity, and whereas maybe some of my work has veered towards being a little bit didactic, maybe, I would hope that the majority of my work has actually celebrated this language without saying you should speak it, but actually just showing that actually just sharing life experiences in this language and presenting this language as a contemporary language. You know, it's a modern language that we speak now. One of the things I actually, a little pet hate of mine is when people say, you know, about the Welsh language, oh, it's one of the oldest languages in Europe. I go, really? Is that true? Is that actually relevant? I don't care how old it is. The reality for me, it's a living language. It's a modern language. It's the language of now for me. It's the language I speak every day with my friends and my family and much of my community and my colleagues. There's nothing old about it at all. It's the language of now. And actually to present our minority languages as contemporary and relevant, and contemporary as the English language, because it is. It's just smaller.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. So that takes me to, you spoke very beautifully about your background and your parents and where you came from and your community in order to contextualize where your world has come out, you know, where your role as the director at Theatre Again and where that all grew out of. I'm quite curious to ask you about, I suppose, this notion of taking the local to illustrate the global, and how you manage in Wales to work with that balance of working with traditional communities and the audiences there, and to serve those audiences, and at the same time still try and retain that contemporary, open to all non-Welsh speakers, if you like. So that's a balance that we have to work with all the time, and I think that exists across the three countries. Would you like to talk a little bit about that, reaching those audiences and how you keep that balance?
Well, I suppose how we reach audiences or how we inspire audiences is by telling good stories well, and if we do our jobs as, you know, storytellers, as directors and writers and dramaturgs and actors, then no matter the language, that work should reach audiences, and that should speak to audiences. I mean, I spoke briefly about the rather bizarre trip we had to Taipei, and that kind of still amazes me in a way, that we brought the play Llwyth to the Edinburgh Fringe, and somehow managed to get into the British Council showcase with the piece. It had played previously in Wales, and then it was picked up by had quite a bit of interest actually internationally, but it was quite a big show, and the only show that had enough money actually to book the show to bring to their festival was the International Arts Festival at Taipei. But actually, it was quite bizarre because it was a play about 5 gay men in Cardiff on an international rugby night, and who got into a spot of trouble, and was actually talking about the very specific nature of Welsh language culture, in relation maybe to the dominant English language culture. And it was actually quite mysterious to me at the time. Why would the director of the Taipei Arts Festival remotely find this interesting? It was a piece of, it was dialogue. It was kind of wall-to-wall dialogue piece. It wasn't, it wasn't physical theatre. But then, of course, in going to Taipei, discovering actually that it did speak to them because of the very particular political nature of life there in relation to China, or the political, socio-political struggles that they were wrestling with there, and linguistic too. And the play just struck a chord with them. So you never know who's watching, and you never know how relevant your very specific or your very local work might be in a wider context. The Taipei Arts Festival director actually got into a spot of bother in programming the piece, because actually some of the authorities thought it was rather politically provocative for us to be celebrating a minority language culture. So you never know how your work actually might travel. But obviously, in making that piece, we didn't think of an international audience. We thought about our home audience. We wanted to reflect our audience's own story back to them. And then accidentally it traveled. So the local can always be global if it's good, if it's relevant, if it tells a story well.
I think there's a question come in from Owen McAvoy. So I'll just run to that just now while we're chatting. He's just mentioned in Ireland that they've recently set up an art collective, Gaelic, to promote the Irish language work of queer artists and to encourage further work and collaboration. And they've been surprised to see just how much has been going on in what others might imagine to be a tiny sphere. So this is really interesting given the content of the piece that you've just spoken about. He's asked if you could tell us a little bit about the queer arts community working through the Welsh language.
Sure. So I was inspired back in 1985 when the first professional Welsh language production on a gay theme was presented. It was called Wastad ar y Tu Fas by a playwright called Sean Arian, who very sadly recently died. Although he was a straight writer, a playwright. He wrote a play on a gay theme, but it was the first. And I remember as a young man who was not yet out, actually going to see that piece and being very inspired and very moved to see something of myself at least reflected on the stage for the first time. And there have been other plays since then as well that have been on a gay theme and included gay characters. Yeah, I think gay writers and theatre makers feel very at home in Welsh language theatre now, because the gay stories and gay artists have been represented and presented on stage in the Welsh language now for quite some time. And there's also the National Eisteddfod in Wales. In recent years, they also kind of host sort of a parallel festival, if you like, of gay culture, mas ar y maes, out on the field. And so, yeah, it's quite, whereas when I was growing up, I felt actually I can't possibly be gay and Welsh speaking both at the same time, because I couldn't see myself in the Welsh language culture. But now actually Welsh language culture is full of queers. So yeah, crack on. But then there is a lesson in this, though, for me, in terms of how other minorities at the moment may not be well represented in Welsh language culture. And so my own experience in this regard actually is a helpful reminder that this work will never be done. You may be able to say, oh, okay, there's fairly good representation of the gay culture of queer people in Welsh language culture at the moment, but actually there's very poor representation of ethnic minorities, Black, and also disabled. And so we have to work harder to make sure that those people also, and those people's stories are reflected also in what we do. And you know, that's a journey that we're on, and that certainly is not an easy one, but that's a journey we also have to make.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're much further down the line. We recently collaborated with Birds of Paradise, who are a theatre company whose work with disabled artists in Scotland, and it was interesting the learning we had and the parallels, actually, the challenges, and even I've noticed when we try and incorporate embedded or integrated BSL into productions, the conversations that arise about other minoritized languages and how those challenges that they face, I find the more we make productions to include disabled artists, and you know, basically right across the board in whatever group you're talking about, to try and be as inclusive as possible, and yet really hit home when Black Lives Matter kind of came to the fore in the summer. And I'm still struggling about how we can reach out, but I think these are ongoing conversations, and it's really interesting to hear you talking about drawing on your own personal experiences and how that can help. I am trying to do my best here now with the, so we've got another question coming in. Arwell mentioned, this is from Sam O'Farry. Arwell mentioned the challenge of reaching audiences beyond the language without compromising the experience for those whom it is intended. Could you speak more about that, both in terms of finding the balance, perhaps highlighting some of the different approaches he's taken to that question? Yeah, so I will leave that with you.
So we've tried several approaches. We've used surtitles, as in putting the text on a screen either above or to one side of the stage. We've had some challenges with regards to that. I remember I was working for a theatre company quite a few years ago now when we spoke to him about, and we're going to offer surtitles for the play. And he said, no, you're not, or else I'm pulling it. This is intended for Welsh-speaking audiences. I do not want my work translated to English. Thank you very much. Okay, so that was a challenging conversation. And there have been other times as well when, you know, I remember a particular incident where we were presenting The Tempest in Welsh, a storm. And it was quite a popular production, particularly with schools. And we were sold out on one particular for one particular performance. And it was a play. It was for that production. We had surtitles, but we had said beforehand. You know, we had put on the poster, this production will have surtitles, and these performances will not. So that people could choose, you know, if you don't like surtitles, then you can choose to avoid those performances and come to a performance where there will be no surtitles. Mm-hmm. So anyway, in an English medium school, or you know, a group of school kids wanted to come and see the play, but they didn't speak Welsh, and the only evening they could come, because other performances had sold out, was to an evening where there were no surtitles. And then we took the decision, actually, just so that we can get this big school booking in, because actually it's a bit empty, that performance. Let's put surtitles here, even though it's not on the poster. And that got us into a bit of trouble because people objected to that. They'd come to see a performance, thank you very much, that had been advertised as not having surtitles, and they had seen surtitles. So it's actually quite a political point, you know, to include surtitles or not. But we want to increase our audiences, and we want to bring non-Welsh speakers to our shows. And we find actually that it's a way about, you know, evangelizing about the language in a way. It actually helps bring people to the language, I would argue. Although others might argue that it doesn't. But anyway, we then developed some technology that called Sibrwd, which allows you to have translation onto your mobile phone. So we developed with the tech company this app that's allowed for the translation to be kind of so that you receive it directly and discreetly to your phone while you're watching the performance. So that then doesn't impact on the Welsh speakers in the room. So then we were able to say, actually, we can give translation for all our performances via this app. And if you're a Welsh speaker and don't need, you might not even be aware that other people are receiving a translation because it's going directly to their phone. And it appears as text on the phone, and it appears as an audio recording as well in the ear. But it's not a translation of the whole text. That would be far too complex. It's a synopsis of what's actually happening on stage. It's a comment on what's happening on stage rather than a direct translation. And it is pre-recorded and preloaded into the system, but triggered live to coincide with moments during the live performance. But at other times we've used surtitles, and certainly when we've taken our work beyond Wales, then every performance we have a surtitle screen.
That's really interesting. So when you're using the app, the experience for a non-Welsh speaker is that they will access through a synopsis rather than actual live feed. That's
right, yes. Yeah, and we were somewhat inspired by this from, well, actually, I went to see, during 2012, the Globe Theatre ran a festival of they did every Shakespeare play in a different language, 37 plays in 37 different languages. And I went to see a couple of those. And what they did then was actually to present a synopsis of what was happening, as opposed to the original Shakespeare text. And I thought that was quite interesting, an interesting approach.
And have you ever used live feed where you have actors where through the app you will actually experience real time, I mean, not necessarily the full script, but dialogue between actors? Has that ever happened using the app?
Yeah, no, not by using the app, but we have experimented with that in the past, where an actor will speak the text. What audiences find is that it's quite difficult to follow. Which actor which bit is being translated to me now? That can be a bit confusing. And if you've got two actors on stage, it's something that it's quite possibly you can do it. And if you have two actors that are also giving a live feed translation, then particularly if one is male and one is female, something obvious like that, then you know. But then the problem is that the audience have a relationship with the voiceover actor rather than the actors on stage, and that can be somewhat strange.
Yes, I totally agree. As someone who performed with a live, yes. It's interesting, isn't it, the balance, even, I'm assuming when you subtitle or surtitle, that even then you're not using the full text, because otherwise, it's a condensed. Okay, sorry, I'm getting some feed from the Welsh translator while I'm speaking. I'm not sure, Phelim, if you could help out there. So Phelim, sorry, Arwell, there's a couple of questions that have come up on the feed about, so if anybody's got questions, if you could put them in the Q&A rather than the chat, because I'm not doing very well coordinating both at the same time. So Sam, yes, I think you've covered, the kind of reaching audiences beyond the language without compromising the experience of those intended. So I think we've covered that. Rona Dougal has asked, who is my other partner in crime at Theatre Galore, what is the geographical spread for Theatre Gen's work within Wales? Is the theatre sector city-based, while speaker communities can be more rural-based? Are there challenges in relation to reaching and working with people in those areas? And what solutions have you found?
Sure. Well, our geographic reach, I guess, is the whole of Wales, because there are Welsh speakers in every nook and cranny. There are communities, of course, where particularly maybe in the north, more so even in the northwest and in the southwest, where the Welsh language is the majority language. But having said that, there's a lot of Welsh speakers in Cardiff. So there's, we have urban communities and rural communities, also in the industrial heartland of the sort of southeast valleys. There are a lot of young Welsh speakers because of the prevalence of Welsh medium education, particularly in those areas. So, that it's challenging actually in terms of the plays that we stage, the stories that we tell, actually to find stories that are relevant throughout the nation, to the whole gamut of Welsh speakers. And sometimes we have to be specific and hope that it will travel, going back to a previous point that I made. So we're very conscious in the program that we create, that we have stories that reflect rural life, that reflect urban life, that include, that actually are primarily North Wales dialect or South Wales dialect. So, that there are dialects of Welsh as well that we also try and have a balance of in our program of work. And also a program of work that appeals in some parts or in some productions to a younger audience, and then maybe to an older audience. And so
sy'n apelio at gynulleidfa fengach neu hŷn, bydd un ddrama ddim yn chwarae i bawb. Bosib felly, dyn ni'n licio gwneud yn siŵr bob blwyddyn
hopefully pleases someone, but actually
bod ni'n gwneud rhywbeth sydd gobeithio yn plesio rhywun, ond mae'n gwbl amhosib plesio bawb.
I mean, you and your team at Theatre Again are doing an unbelievable job. It's something that we dream of. I have to say, it's more challenging working as one of the few theatre companies who work in Scottish Gaelic. Almost all your productions are supposed to answer everything and reach everyone and be all things to all people. So yeah, I'm in awe of your ability to be able to program across a year and knowing that you can balance all those different audiences and yeah, different artists, age groups, and all the rest of it. There's a question that's come in from...
Can I just add before you go on, Maureen, that, I mean, there are a number of other companies in Wales as well that make Welsh language theatre. So Theatre Again is on that point exactly. We're not the only show in town, and so there are other companies as well, that particularly companies that might make work that that travel to smaller communities, very small venues. Other companies that make primarily work for young people, for example. So we don't feel that pressure in terms of that we have to be all things to all men all the time. Although there's an element of that being the national company. Everybody wants a bit of it, as it were. But we're not the only show in town by any means.
No, and it's great to hear that there are other companies making work. It's a testament to a healthy sector, and something. And likewise, we're not the only theatre company in Scottish Gaelic, and I'm sure in Ireland it's the same. But just we're not quite at the stage you guys are at. I think it's really interesting to hear you speak about different dialects, because that's true of Irish and of Scottish Gaelic. And yeah, it's something that I guess we should think about. There is a question, if you don't mind me moving on, that came in from Kira, whose work we'll see. She's one of the commissioned artists, one of the Irish commissioned artists, and she wanted to ask you, Arwell, about translations into Welsh. Do you have a view about something being translated as opposed to something being written in Welsh from the get-go? Yeah, she's left it as open as that.
Well, we do, as I said before, we do present works in Welsh that are translated from other languages, and they can be world classics. I mentioned we did The Tempest, for example. So we've done a few Shakespeare's. We've done Ibsen, Brecht, and etc. So we think it's important that world classics, well-known classical works in theatre are presented in the Welsh language. That somehow seems to it means that those pieces will reach audiences that wouldn't otherwise actually engage with those works, particularly maybe in more rural settings. I don't know, but actually to present the best that the world has to offer in the Welsh language, in a way elevates the status of the Welsh language. It says, here's a work, why can we only hear Ibsen in English, or Brecht in English, or or even Shakespeare in English? And actually, interestingly, in terms of Shakespeare, people who people said, actually, I've understood Shakespeare for the first time. We did Macbeth recently, and fairly recently, and people saying, "Oh, right, I got a lot more from that than I have done previously from Macbeth." Because actually, when you translate any piece of theatre, particularly historical pieces, or pieces from a century or more from the past, actually you translate to a contemporary idiom. Actually a modern, you wouldn't present Shakespeare in Welsh, in Elizabethan Welsh, because such thing doesn't exist, or would be a bit bizarre. So you translate to a contemporary idiom. So actually audiences may well get a bit more, or understand it more easier, because it's translated to a contemporary context. And then we also present modern pieces, contemporary theatre from other cultures. We recently did a production of Le Père, Florian Zeller, in Welsh, for example, which was a recent hit on the West End, and I think there's a film made, isn't there? It's about to be released. And we've also presented works that have been written by Anglo-Welsh writers, or Welsh writers who have written the work in English, and we've also translated the pieces to Welsh. And somehow in doing so, it just kind of gives the piece a slightly different feel. Yeah, we have a very, very wide approach to an open approach to translation. Although we're always keen not to present too many works in translation, because actually at the end of the day, it's probably more important that people should hear original stories, contemporary stories. And so that is the mainstay of our work.
Okay, that's really useful. Yeah, to think of kind of giving things new life and a contemporary. I saw a two-hander version of Macbeth, which is Macbeth in Gaelic, and actually, given its Scottish connections, I was blown away actually. It was Katrina Lexi Campbell and Divey Walker who were the performers, and it did breathe new life, apart from the fact that it was a new adaptation. So yeah, I totally concur. And to look at the challenges of maybe other contemporary work in our minoritized languages is something really interesting. It's not something that happens usually in Scotland. It maybe happens a little bit more in Ireland. I'm not sure. There's another question just come in from, so I think we've discussed third titles quite a bit. So I think we've covered that. But what we've not discussed, this has come in from Marianne, I think, about your approach to dramaturgy and how work is developed as part of the creative process. So just to contextualize things, obviously dramaturgy is very different depending on where you're working in Europe. I know in Germany it has a very different meaning, and and the process is different. And actually, even working with different dramaturgs, it seems to vary. This is a process certainly for us. It has felt like a very English-based process, and currently we don't have any folk who have those skills, dramaturgical skills, with Scottish Gaelic. And so what we wind up doing invariably is working with an English-speaking dramaturg, and they work to support the development of the script from an English translation. But the writer starts always in Gaelic, translates each draft, which is exhausting and a little bit of an extra weight on them. And it's just a practicality, because we haven't yet managed to find a dramaturg who can work on those languages. What's been your approach in terms of when you're working and developing writers?
Well, I felt very terribly sorry for you, actually, in the way that you described that. That sounds like a a very challenging process. No, we in developing new work, the dramaturgical feedback will be in. Oh, sorry. Now I'm receiving the Irish translation somehow.
I think you've got to switch your interpreter button off. Interpretation.
Okay, hang on. Let me do that. Yes, gone. So yeah, the no, we give dramaturgical feedback to Welsh plays in Welsh. We don't translate them. We work with dramaturgs and Welsh speaking directors of new work that have some experience. I guess it's because we do have access to that in a way that you may not have. But then again, I suppose it's because we've been doing it for quite a bit, maybe. And yes, it's the English model as you describe, but we're just fortunate, I guess, in that we've been doing a lot of new writing in the Welsh language for quite some time, and there is a small pool. It's small, obviously, but there is a small pool of directors and dramaturgs who are able to do that work in the Welsh language.
I'm just wondering, thank you so much for answering all the hundreds of questions. Before we wind up, because I think we're nearing the time, if there's any last questions anybody wants to ask, just pop them in the Q&A. And if not, I guess through the week, Arwell will be appearing and disappearing at various points, and you can catch up with him. For me, it's been hugely inspiring to hear about your work and all that Theatre Again is doing. I'm hoping that we will collaborate in the future. We'll see. And but I'm been giving the wrap up now, so I'm just going to sign off. Diolch, I guess. Míle tang, gur míle mágah.
Croeso.
Gur míle mágah a chuirde beirt. I hope that those of you who need interpretation, I'll be speaking Irish again, as I'm curious, you might go down and choose German, which miraculously will give you an English translation from the Irish. And asmuid a homa godain isteach sail na harclaniachta as arclaniach. Tá sé ina friblíh tá annachchuid buinte amach clíra ord agus ahantas buinte amach ché. Is go Harbheith táchtaí go cóchtach granúir lándáréire is sail na Gaelne, sail Urbach na Gaelne, sail Coimshire na Gaelne, sail na Man sa Gaelan. Tá annach identiché tá an ihe Mike oscailte rec tasna ché bhí si in an ambassador de Irish Scríbhneoirí na HÉireann. Tá si díreach capathe mar scríbhneoir cónathach le Ollscoil Chathair Bhleá Clia. Agus táid Harbheith
a writer in residence with Dublin City University, and maybe Ciara.
Ínta gur míle maith agat Rachel. Díobh ar fad borda maidin bha. Bhí an pléis sin ar aus ar fad agus tá mé ar bhís go bheiceisibh an piasa seo, an piasa nua a scríobh mé. Ciúnas inis is anam don fiasa agus an cúisna sin an rud a deireann tú ag tús óráide. So tá an piasa seo site ag banis agus tá an cholín caibhdeachta ag tuairt óráide agus feiceisibh se chuna sa hitan sé amach. Scríb mé é bunathe ar rán a tháinig cuam, bunathe ar siomh a tháinig cuam. Bhí méid smaoinemh chuine a bheith ag banis a rádán, agus an sin bhíor man rácha scríb le dul leis sin, agus is rud nua dom é a bheith scríobh don airclan, agus bhín go hundúil a scríb filiocht ó bhéal, agus tá mé ionach buíoch as an deis seo rud éigean a chur le chéile i gceart agus a chur osfor góir. Mar ba mé ansása just clústal cad ceapan siú faoi agus cadí na féidirachtaí leis an bíasa seo. So rinne mé tafad ar an stíl found footage, mar bhí mé géirí tuairt le fios gur fíor óráid é seo a hála ag fíor bhanis, agus daoine sa luch fécanna ag déanamh na tafada. Mar ceapan go sé táhachtach go mraithan tú gur fíor rud é seo just gan a bheith smíanamh gur rud bréagach é, mar caiithid tú saoú go sé seo ag tarlúint os do chóir amach. So sin é, tá mé go mór faoi chumín ag gach duine a thug a chuid amadam, agus tá mé fíorhríocht alíonn na Gaeltachta as an deis ionach seo an písa seo a chur os fargóir. So tásúla go mé sibh soltas.
With the rain in Oldford.
Let's go. No, we didn't need to read it.
Give it back, though. Yeah,
Get a key
Scorvina Margaret. Agus Anish Sarah.
Margaret Mihal. Die ervaart Christashev. So, fado, gal me de Liz, geschreven Dondi. Da suckered no da banish, Kebeku a honiger dus. Agus, na actually go honing Liz actually new, Shul, Susan Shapale, agus far, Klishta Sever, Erlov. I had her Mihal, Mia Werkus Lansa Mihal, August, and Moira Os. I shot fad a her stool in you. Near me stool kosher in fiha of Spi Liz August Peter Ding Volta Gabosa Dish in Blina August. I'm Blina knock more heart. Touch late fresh target so co gorgeous live. August Captain Gallery or some Goctin and shot near there and give a shot on kosher is far in Blina August on team kosher fresh. So Vulme Liz, you smell not damn Blina Owen. Nor a Reinmar Orison a Holland Macklin. Agus céin ar bhfuil siad a Peter go dtí blianta níos déanaí, múnar beirt le Liz sa chuí ceann céine. So, tháinig mé bháile, tríochta tréis na céad lá riamh ar an osscoil, agus daim siad mé Liz, strán séir ag an am, ina cnap cudalta imó labasa. Agus ar an mór cuislapa bhí aráiste na ite, agus bhí altacht arm. So Fiera, you're gushig me mar you hear visum care ding. Og Fiera gushig she agus he she sues agus lanchi roig ag eha an aráiste ag míniu corsi. The laba hain an chrua gojo agus farta she fekent an aulian scale leis na lapacha Ellis an orsa. Ach near real she mo cancer vi sé co-comporduction gur hit a color ar heat the hashma. Agus the an tarasha ag the vitamin C mar capshi grab slide on the top there. So, Nimona sásta a bhí mé leis an Goldilocks seo ag tapta seach in a laba lena salacha ráiste ach agus ise ina sí an sin le manga goire ar a haig beléir go raibh si ar compordlam. Agus bhra mise ar mo compord lehí. And nuair sé onm an ruúig a chur arthaí agus ráinimar laba anna chuid an bhliain sin. Cé go bhór mise slide on, go garage ina ia. A cén bhainte ag seo leis an orgur bhfuil Peter le Liz. Well, tháinig sesin bháile, go after leis fiachfar ina heach an bhfuil le taction ach bhí Liz ina knap cudalta in a laba. Agus chuaigh sesin na colla ar an orlór, is ar maidin nuair gúisigh siad ceannig se chicken fillet roll dó, agus bin an chéad cuine a bhí acu. So, léiríonn an dáisgéil seo rudagan faoin gcuí a mraithan sé Liz a bheith timpeall. Duine ar le atá intí, tá dríocht intí. Agus tá antá ar Peter go mbeidh dríocht sin ina héal inis go jo. Ok, gan héal muile an dáin. Mar glú char Liz agus an duine a bhí an aontíos le hí le 10 mbliana an nuas,
Fartius maladar chuir sa scéal, agus beag an cóirla nar iarach a thuirt, so tidal an dahan seo ná. Roint rudí bechór de Peter a rá. Ní hain chóchar a thu. Ach nach cuma, níl cadda níos blasta na bheith i cheanta. Ní glánan tú an tá, ach tá tusa lunrach i de dhéimant agus tá míanach onit. Cibé áit an ggóin do chusa, an tí speisialta ag gach ócád ná tusa. Ní bhíon tú i siúl, bíon tú ag dawsa hart, I mún clasan rotha is seasamh láb, is bíon darcha óir agat dá bhar. Seo roint rudí, bechór de Peter a rá. Is minic tú a pléasca, le goire is le grá, is dúirt mar a bheith búma ann, I de dhé fágtar slád. Rawa bit, ní hoogtar dúin, ach bíon muid ahratha go búin. Ní ha, bheith búma, ro fuoin táilta. Is cuiafach gan tú sná dera ach siar héad gan stéan gan stad. Seo roint rudí bechór de Peter a rá. Sa gansaí is jobalí bíon tusa I do bhanacín. In honbun, seansealach is brogaratha scríba de chusa. Is aisling tusa. Déirtar nach bhfuil séir ó lucht, ach cé a daimseog faut on it. Ein lúbeir láir atá agat, caitheann tú go mórtasach. Is ceacht féin grá dúine, leanamhuid do bhún le, is stopan de alsúnach. No slide on. Seo roint rudí a chóir de Peter a rá. Fiú is tú as mark, bíon tú a gheart. Bíon tú có seoráil sa glán go gurrann tú an dubh ina gheall. Ní cluistear wet céim fá, is tusa céim fá nach. Níor dúnú duras riamhairt nar oscail tú fuinneog. Spidóg manach có láidir le foiil chú. Nar thugann fear feisty earth, fagríonn tú go múnta le mion goire nach swicin de húla. Atá có díomhar leis an bharige, an airige. Atá có dahan le mo chrá. Seo roint rudí go chóir de Peter a rá. Strocan tú tí airigid, có sciopí le drochra tóga. Ach go bháin mas gád it sábal, an sin ní cuireann tú a mú, irid is pinion rua. Téim a mú, ag féchant an dimpel de grua. Go brach na bretha, ní wihi mé ma há. Seo roint rudí bechóir de Peter a rá. Tá sé có simplí le seo. I de éonacht bím ar bór. Bhí saoil a gom gan tú, ach ní ilthing ar ór. Mo gráthú, go dangan, ó bholach go sáil. Solas is scá gach ile anál, gach smíanamh I de bheabhar, gach gníomh ó de lámh, gach ile orlach talún ar a ágan tú de lurg, ón géad rairc ort, I malaba I de hún, go labba mo bháis, is tusa maroon. Is inis. Chuí Peter ar le glún, is geall tú go do grá, is seo roint rudí bechóir de Peter a rá.
Oh, Ciara, wow. Tásúla gom go gloisin tú an búla bus fiúil atá ó gachéine ag tá ag éistecht nach ligan an technoliaachta agus an fiúlachas donna cos go láthir wow bhí sé sin cóta agus álan rud míad maigad agus asúlagam sí bhn féin sin eiscint a rís hena féin agus asúlagam go gíhí go léir a rís ag a lua. So a chuirde beag deis againn muidna go bhfuil am againn bheith timpeall de brise taobheag agus beag deis againn ceiste chuirciúra má sí san sin agus chorá beag nar bhar máilta a bheith againn so más máileh cetal a bheirú agus cupáin deas a gáiltí féin. Díobse atá ag amachta seachtaí an seisiún dúnta ag man lé tá nasc a gaibh chuige sin so nádin dearúd si féine olahú chuige sin beag sé sin a tarlú ag man lé ach leanamid leis an brise té an seo a chéine eile. So fan second beggarm just tróbeag technúd a gáil ómachó lechathe an seo maidir lei sin capan beidir bhfuil muidir fannacht mar táid an seo nó beidir go bhfuil gáún nasc beag beiste a leanúnt ach idir an dálinn bergin cetal fáid cupán té agus be muidir eis libh ag an second go mí amach.
Ardal chug arwel. Da iawn.
Hi William, ti iawn?
Iawn. O ti'n arbennig o dda.
O,
diolch. Dwlu ar dy araith di, yn hyfryd.
O, diolch o galon i ti. O'n i'n gweld enw di yma, o'n i'n meddwl na ti oedd o, ac dim ond o Gymraeg i Saesneg ti'n cyfieithu, ia? Ta be?
Ie, o'r Gymraeg i'r Saesneg yn ôl fel wy'n deall, ond o'n i'n clywed George yna, oedd e hefyd yn hwyrach wedi cyfieithu o'r Saesneg i'r Gymraeg, felly falle bydd gofyd i fi wneud hynny hefyd. Does dim ots da fi, be bynnag maen nhw'n gofyn i fi wneud, mae'n gwirionedd.
Wyt ti'n siarad unrhyw un o'r ieithoedd eraill te?
Yn anffodus na gw. O'n i'n ieithu'n llwyr gyda bywydau sti ynglyn â sut mae ieithoedd Celtaidd eraill yn swno. Achos o'n i wastad eisiau gwybod be mae'r Gymraeg yn swno fel. Achos fel rhywun sy'n ei ddeall dwi ddim yn gwybod be mae'n swno fel. A wy'n tybied mae'n swno fel mae Cerniweg yn swno i ni'n rhywbeth. Ond oedd yn had, oedd e'n gallu siarad Llydaweg, ac oedd e'n dipyn o ieithydd, felly oedd ganddo fe ryw ddealltwriaeth o'r ieithydd yma i gyd. Felly, ond oedd e wastad yn gweud bod, oedd e'n gweld y tebygrwydd, oedd e'n gallu deall nhw, ond dwi ddim, a wy'n unig yn union beth ti'n weid, ac a dweud y gwir, es i a'n partner i Nicky ar yn gwyliau ni, 20 mlynedd yn ôl nawr, i ynysoedd Scilly. A o'n i yno, jyst yn sgwrsio yn gilydd yn y Gymraeg, ac yn sydyn mae'r boi ma'n dechrau siarad yn ni. Ond do'n i'n deall gair oedd e'n weid. Oedd rhaid fi stopo fe, sgwrsio fi, wi rili ddim yn deall beth ti'n weid, so o'n i'n gweithio yn Saesneg. A nath e wedyn ni droi'r Saesneg a gweud, o'n i'n siarad gyda ti yn y Gerniweg. O'n i'n deall na, ond oedd ti'n deall fi. Oedd e'n honni i fod ond wy'n gwybod, a just rhyw lwn Celtaidd oedd yn ymyfrydu yn y rhamant y peth, neu oedd e rili yn ei allu.
Dwi'n meddwl bod yna fwy debygrwydd rhwng y Gymraeg a'r Gelteg, a'r Gernyweg, nag unrhyw un o'r ieithoedd eraill.
Ond ydy pobl sy'n siarad Cerniweg yn deall y Gymraeg yn well nag yw'r Cymru'n deall y Gerniweg?
Ie, mae'n bosib.
Mae'n bosib, yn dyw e?
Mae'n bosib.
Wy'n gwybod ieithoedd fel Czech a efo Pwyleg bod bod un yn swno, oedd fi'n credu pobl yng Ngweriniaeth Tsiec yn dilorni un o'r ieithoedd fel, ond mae hwnna'n swno fel sgwrs babanod yr iaith yna. Ond maen nhw'n ei ddeall timod. A fi'n gwybod bod yna rhyw ddealltwriaeth rhwng Swedeg a Daneg.
Hey guys, hi Stefan and Armand. I would love to have a longer chat with you, but just to let you know, we will be closing the webinar now.
Okay.
Oh, no worries.
But if you want to continue the conversation, you're welcome.
Oh, no. Stefan and me can have a chat somewhere else, elsewhere, another time. We'll see you in the next Zoom.
Yeah.
Hey,
thanks, Philip. Fantastic. Lovely. Ta-ra.
Ta-ra.
Hwyl.